Welcome to Movie Heaven, Movie Hell with me, Simon Aitken, and
I'm Keith Eyles, and we are both independent filmmakers that like to talk about other directors' work.
so if you've been following us, we've finally reached the letter H, and you probably guessed who it is. But Keith, who is our director for H?
Oh, I wonder who that could be. I mean, is it somebody that we mentioned pretty much in every podcast we've ever done so far, perhaps?
Nah, I can't be that person.
I don't know, but
I don't think we've mentioned him enough.
It is, of course, the one and only Alfred Hitchcock, which, doesn't really need much introduction. Obviously, there are shed loads of books, material, documentaries, etc., about this man and his career out there. So I think maybe it's worth making this more sort of personal about what Alfred Hitchcock means to us, rather than what he meant to the world of cinema, perhaps.
Well, let me start then by saying that for a short period of time, I lived in Leytonstone, which is where Alfred Hitchcock was born.
Absolutely.
And Leytonstone, I'm very
Essex,
proud.
Mate.
I know it says it's Essex, but it didn't feel like Essex. It might be just on the boundary. But it was more Walthamstow. Mate. Walthamstow. But they're very fond of of the director there. And if you go to the tube station there, they have murals on the wall of all his films.
Fantastic.
There's a subway that you walk towards the station, and they're all there. So if you're ever in Leytonstone, check them out, and also check out the park there, where he got the idea of doing the birds, seeing all the birds fighting over there. So
fantastic, absolutely. Well, I mean, this is almost we could almost, and I think there are out there, have entire podcasts that run for years that are dedicated purely to Hitchcock. I mean, there is literally that much material. I think for me personally, I never hold back in the fact that everybody knows I'm a big fan of Hitchcock. My early exposure actually to Alfred Hitchcock was, again, as we always do with these memory lane things growing up, was bizarrely the television series remake in the 80s. They redid Alfred Hitchcock Presents.
okay.
They were like contemporary stories based on some of the old stories, but what they did is they put colorized versions of Alfred Hitchcock's introductions to those shows, those very quirky, dark humor.
I do remember seeing them.
Yeah. That's how I sort of first came to know who he was, in terms of because the thing about Alfred Hitchcock is it's weird. I guess the only sort of people that perhaps sort of come close on this are, I guess, Quentin Tarantino and possibly Spielberg. But I mean, he was kind of your first celebrity director, wasn't he? In many respects,
to such an extent that he could do cameos in his films.
Exactly,
giving birth to the director's cameo, because everybody knew who Hitchcock looked like. So there was that little Easter egg where you could spot him, in a shot, usually carrying an instrument. I was having a look earlier at a list of Alfred Hitchcock's cameos in the films, and
but two of our choices is definitely carrying an instrument.
Yes.
In fact, the same one, I believe, the same instrument.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, absolutely. He was a celebrity. He did, I think, quite enjoy, being on camera and doing interviews and being a little bit sort of cheeky and naughty and pushing the boundaries a little bit for the time. It's that kind of weird thing. I always have this sort of little saying that I believe in about the whole film industry and the creative process, in so much that I always say, producers are frustrated writers, writers are frustrated directors, directors are frustrated actors, and actors are frustrated people. Which means that I'm just, seriously frustrated in many respects. But I do
Yes.
feel that in some respects Hitchcock may have, in some ways, been almost like a sort of frustrated actor, and certainly quite a frustrated person, I think. But as I said, there are whole essays on that, so I won't go
Yeah.
too much into that.
From my point of view, I don't think he was a frustrated actor, because I think he just enjoyed the limelight. He just enjoyed being a showman. Because I mean, there was the whole
Absolutely.
thing with with Psycho, introducing the fact that you had to see the film from the beginning, and the advertising for that was, a standee of Alfred Hitchcock. So
yeah, a massive campaign. I mean,
yeah.
he was a big star by that point, and people would go and see Hitchcock films rather than necessarily a Cary Grant film, although sometimes it was both, obviously. But I mean, what's fascinating about this man is because he essentially grew up himself from the birth of cinema. He did everything from silent films to talkies. He worked in black and white. He worked in color. He worked for every studio, every major studio, as well as independents. He worked both in the UK and the US, and as we already mentioned, he branched out into television as well in the 50s when that was the latest thing, and very much, I feel, as well, an experimental director. Yes, indeed, he borrowed from European cinema in terms of many of his techniques. He didn't necessarily create, but he did definitely introduce them to the mainstream, and in a very interesting way, because he was always, as well as being the king of the cameo and the master of the MacGuffin and all those sort of things, he always, whether it was from a novel or a play or whatever, he always worked in the thriller realm, and dealt with murder and espionage and twisted characters with psychological problems and all that sort of thing, and those type of films actually have always interested me anyway.
Yeah. Well, his films have been mostly about the wronged man, as in the person who the authorities believe is the culprit, and of course has to find a way to get out of that predicament. It all stems from when he was a kid, and his parents, I think it was his mother, wasn't it, that told the police officer to put him in a cell and lock him away.
As he loves to tell, yes, in
Yes.
some of his old interviews with
Yes.
Truffaut and whatever. But yeah, but yeah, no, absolutely. They always sort of stemmed around, the ordinary person in extraordinary circumstances, and obviously scared of authority often, and sometimes, actually, I noticed, especially with some of the ones I've looked at for this, is he liked to sort of poke fun a little bit at the upper classes as well.
Yes, he does. Yes, he did. Yeah.
I think that's obviously, he came from a working class background originally, so yeah, that's all quite interesting. And of course, there's been inspiration for lots of directors, some of which we've already talked about. Definitely the likes of De Palma. Spielberg's a big fan, M. Night Shyamalan, and he's definitely influenced cinema along the way. So
though I don't think Hitchcock would be too happy about that last influence, though. I should not, influence M. Night Shyamalan.
Well, that's another one, isn't it? That's another podcast.
No, I think we'll give him a miss, because
there's so many S's. There's so many S's.
Yeah, but I mean, just too many movie hells there as well. Won't be any surprises there. What's your choice for movie heaven?
Right.
Sixth Sense, Unbreakable. What's your choice for movie hell? So many.
That's true.
Okay. But let's get back to Hitchcock. So, Keith, what is your pick for movie heaven?
Right. Well, I mean, as I always have to, sort of preamble before my choice. I mean, it was a tough one because I love loads of his movies. It's funny, actually. Again, growing up, apart from the television series. Obviously, of course, like everyone else, I grew up with the big American Hollywood films that he had hits with in the 50s and 60s. You know, the really well known ones. The North by Northwests and Rear Window and Birds and et cetera, et cetera. Those greats. So I wanted to think of something that perhaps I wasn't glaringly obvious, and obviously would give me an excuse as well to talk about some other aspects of cinema and the film industry with it. So it's slightly loaded. The one I've gone for in this particular instance is Dial M for Murder, okay, which he made in 1954. Okay, the part of the reason I've chosen this one, apart from the fact it is a great film. I mean, it was his first collaboration with Grace Kelly, who's obviously a gorgeous, leading lady there. He obviously worked with her again on Rear Window and To Catch a Thief, two other excellent films. That's right. The reason I kind of chose this one was because I said about how he sort of experimented with different things. He'd obviously worked in the single shot idea in Rope and done various things, but few people know that he actually did experiment as well in 3D cinema. And a lot of my a year or so ago when I was back teaching, a lot of my students, they thought 3D cinema had started in 2009 with Avatar. And I was sort of explaining, no, it's kind of been happening since the beginning of cinema almost. And there was that time, in the late 40s, early 50s, you had some of the Universal monster movies that were 3D. You had, It Came from Outer Space, and you had House of Wax, and you had all these different, experiments out there with using 3D. And of course, right in the mix of this was Dial M for Murder, which, as I said, was actually made in 53, but released in 54. And obviously, by the time it had been released, the whole fad, the whole gimmick, if you like, of 3D had kind of, disappeared because, people were fed up with wearing these funny looking glasses, and they had to have in big intermissions in the middle of it because they had to obviously run two projectors at the same time, and various reasons it hadn't caught on. So the film was actually released flat. It was released in 2D, and actually I have to say works incredibly well in 2D. I mean, it's it's not one of these films that's 3D for 3D's sake. And for many years, the only 3D bit you could see, and these bring back very fond memories of what is when you used to go to Universal Studios. They used to have, they don't have it anymore, sadly, but they used to have a Alfred Hitchcock show. And what they would do is they would show the classic scene of Grace Kelly, being attacked in 3D. And then the screen would break, and they'd show a bit from the birds and stuff, and then you'd end up going through to a little reenactment of Psycho, and it was great. It was an absolutely brilliant thing that sadly is not there anymore, like I said. Yeah. But a couple of years back, the BFI did a Alfred Hitchcock season. And unfortunately, at the time, I was a freelancer and working in a call center and whatever, so I was a little bit skint, so couldn't really afford to go and see everything. I did get to see some of his silent films. I saw a film called The Lodger, which was the second film he made, which was very interesting. But I did try and catch up on it, as well as wanting to see some of my favorites on the big screen. I did also want to try and catch some of his films that I hadn't seen. But during that season, they actually did do a proper 3D presentation of this with a full-on intermission and everything. And, it was actually very, very effective, I thought, even by today's standards.
Can I ask, was that like post-converted 3D or just using the 3D of the time?
It was using the 3D of the time. It was actually, they ran it on two film projectors, and the glasses that we had, rather than like the sort of polarized 3D glasses that you get nowadays when you go to the multiplex or whatever, this was back to the old traditional red and blue lens type glasses. So it was real old school. It was just as it was. But you know, it worked. It worked incredibly well for this film. And essentially, this film, I mean, it's actually it's from a stage play, which you can kind of tell.
I want to ask about that because this is the first time I watched Dial M for Murder, and I really enjoyed it.
Okay.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. But I'm just wondering, it was very stagey.
Yes.
It was very much shot all studio. Everything was either like back projection, even like just outside, so like the police officer standing outside at the end is just like, you know, back projection.
No, absolutely.
But do you think that he made it kind of that stagey because of the 3D?
Well, I think, I mean, yes, it's from a play. We should credit, I guess, by Frederick Knott, that the play was by, and you know, often he either adapted plays or novels.
Right.
This one's another one that definitely deals with confined space. I mean, obviously, he did Lifeboats quite some time earlier, which all literally took place in a lifeboat, and he'd also done, which was actually his first color film as well. He did Rope, which obviously, yes, again was like watching a piece of theatre almost. It all took place in the one place, real time. You know, with this perfect murder in inverted commas theme that he likes.
I saw Rope when I was studying at Panico, and we actually did a project based on it, trying to do like a story in one shot, using just one reel of Super 8. And watch if you've seen Birdman. Birdman uses similar tricks.
Absolutely, Birdman does. Although what I thought was great about Birdman, I really did like that film last year. But what I thought was amazing about it was, you know, not only did it simulate the one take, but it also, what I thought was brilliant, was time jumped as well, in terms of, you know, rather than it all taking normally those one takes, whether it's De Palma in Snake Eyes or you know, Hitchcock in Rope, or you know, Scorsese in The Goodfellas, whatever. It's usually or Orson Welles in Touch of Evil, all these different ones, but it's normally a sort of real time thing that happens. So we're following the camera and it's real time. But what I liked that they did in Birdman was we followed the camera the whole way, but you know, they would jump to like a week later and the play would be on, and and all that stuff. That was brilliant.
I thought it was great. And I mean, if you haven't seen Birdman, both me and Keith highly recommend it.
Very highly recommend it. Fabulous film, very imaginative, very entertaining. So yes, definitely go to it.
When was the first time you saw this film?
What, Dial M for Murder?
Yes.
Oh, years ago. I mean, it was one of those ones, I think, possibly like a Saturday afternoon or something as a kid. I saw it, and, you know, probably at the time, if I'm honest, thought it was a bit, you know, hot upper class and a little bit boring maybe as a kid. You know, when I really got into it was I started collecting in the sort of early noughties. I started collecting his DVD collections, and obviously this one, because this was one of his Warner films, this came out in the Warner DVD box set of his, and you know, it was great because it had some extras on it and things of that nature. But so I'd watched it sort of flat in 2D several times, but then obviously when, you know, a couple of years back when that 3D release came out, I thought, yes, I've got to go and see this again in 3D, and was, you know, thoroughly glad that I did. So
which version do you prefer?
To be honest, the 3D stuff, I mean, he doesn't use it as a gimmick. Like, there aren't things sort of flying out the screen at you. He kind of uses
there is one shot where
the death shot. Yeah.
Well, not the death shot, but when Grace Kelly is reaching out towards the scissors,
Mm.
and it's towards the camera.
Yeah,
So I
no,
imagine in
absolutely.
3D she's reaching out for you.
Yeah, no, she is.
Which is a gimmick that's been used in 3D films for forever now.
Absolutely. But what I liked is, in terms of the set, and you were absolutely right where you said it. You know, it's all pretty much set bound. What I thought he was very clever with was the placement of everything. So, in other words, you know, you would look through furniture to the action, and
Yeah.
there was a lot of drinks action going on because, of course, all upper class people drink heavily, right? So he had these things where he'd set the drinks bottles and the flower pots and things in the foreground. And yeah, I mean, it was all really effective. But the point is, and I think this is the point of 3D in general, which is why I've kind of chosen this film in some respects to talk a little about this, is if the story works, if the characters are good and the story is engaging and it's interesting, I don't think it really matters. You know, I mean, this film works perfectly well as a 2D film. You know, Hitchcock's use of the camera in it, as always, is fantastic. His use of color in this is brilliant because, of course, you know, as he likes to do with his ladies, you know, Grace Kelly's a bit of a naughty woman in this. She's an adulterer, yeah?
Which is set up very, very well in the opening sequence. I mean, it's only a few shots and just, you know straight away that she's, you know, she's married to this guy, but she's also seeing this other guy on the sly.
Exactly. And what's very clever about this is when they show her with Ray Milland, who plays her husband in the film, you know, she's wearing like a white dress and whatever, and cut to, you're right, just moments later, she's kissing this other guy suddenly, and there she is in red. And it's just like, I love this, you know, what he's doing here. And, you know, it's all absolutely intentional. It's like I always used to say to the kids, you know, everything that you see and hear is there for a reason, no matter how brief it might be or how in the distance it might be. It's all supposed to be serving character and story, which this absolutely does, you know, in a wonderful way. It's not distracting.
Well, I think it was not distracting, but if you know the rules about that kind of stuff, then it's very quite plain to see. If you know what I mean. So, you know, it's those whole rules that, you know, white is you know, virginal and, you know, honest and good, and yet red is sort of, you know, she's a temptress and, you know, she's doing no good and all that kind of stuff. I mean, you know, again, different for it. You see that crop up in his work a lot, where
even in black and white. Yeah,
even in black and white, where it's, you know, you can tell when somebody's up to no good by the color of their clothes.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you know, it's got all of his traits in there. I mean, the story itself, you know, it's a rather convoluted, although quite clever plot. As I said, it's got Ray Milland in it. Now, Ray Milland, I always, again, from my childhood, remembered from Battlestar Galactica as the leader of the council, Sire Yuri, who Adama butted heads with, and obviously he was an old man at that point, but here he is, very young and handsome.
That's
in
right.
This film.
He's the one who in Battlestar Galactica says no, they want peace and stuff, and then of course he gets blown up.
Oh, actually, no. The president, that's Lou Ayres, who's at the beginning, who's President Adar, who gets blown up. Ray Milland is later in it when they elect a new council, and he plays the one that Adama really clashes with, and Apollo clashes with, and then of course after the pilot movie mysteriously disappears for the rest of the series. But anyway, I've got off topic. Sorry.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, with 3D, my feeling on 3D, whether it's classic or modern, is what I tend to do nowadays. If the movie is specifically shot for 3D, I'll go watch it in 3D. However, if it's one of these post-conversion things, just because the studio, you know, want to release and sell more tickets, I tend not to bother. And I use I use similar rules with IMAX as well. Is most of the time, if the film's actually shot in IMAX or shot for IMAX, I'll go see it in IMAX. But if it's a regular one, then I don't like the compromise of the aspect ratio and things of that nature. And interestingly, this is slightly off topic, but Jurassic World, which I really enjoyed, by the way, but obviously not as good as the first one, but hey, that they actually for the first time used a new aspect ratio, which is 2.00 to 1. And the reason they did that was obviously to give the height for the dinosaurs, etc. Like the originals were always in 185, but also to give it a little bit of cinematic flair, but also to make the conversion across to IMAX ratio fit better. So there you go, a little bit of trivia there. But I love it when they sort of come up with these things, you know.
Well, I just want to say that, you know, my rules for watching 3D films and is I go and see the 2D version all the time because at the end of the day it works perfectly well in 2D. It just doesn't add anything to the film apart from maybe give you a headache afterwards.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, if the film, to be honest, if the story and the characters are good, then it should work anyway. Sometimes, I mean, I've seen a few horror films and obviously some sort of animated kids films and whatever where they do sometimes use it very well, and it is.
Yeah, I have to say I enjoyed Final Destination 5.
Exactly.
I watched in 3D and that was good. But I mean, that was also an enjoyable experience because it just had fun with that story.
Yes.
And it just went somewhere that you weren't expecting. So yeah, it was very enjoyable to see it 3D. But I have to say, I saw that Fright Fest, and a lot of people were moaning about it because it was the second film of the festival, and they're like, "Why is this here?" Yeah. And then once we all saw it, we were like, "Oh, this was great! So much fun."
I mean, it is a bit of a gimmick, and I mean, now I've not experienced this yet, but they've even got now at some of the multiplexes, they've got this thing called 4DX, which, you know, obviously the seats move and it fires air and water and all sorts of things. But again, it's just an excuse to make the ticket double the price. And let's be honest, if the film's worth anything, it should work without all of that anyway.
Yeah, so, it doesn't need all those gimmicks. Yeah,
it's like 3D in the home. Never really, you know, I know people have it, but I don't really care, to be honest.
People I know who have 3D in the home, they quite enjoy it more than they do at the cinema. But I'm not convinced. I think until they get to a point where you can watch a 3D film without glasses, you know, I think possibly then. But then that's just going to be like a whole getting used to something new.
Yeah.
Because if that happens, everything will be in 3D.
No, absolutely. The other thing, again, you know, I don't want to just sort of go through the plot. I encourage people, if they're listening to this and haven't seen it, to absolutely see this film because it is very entertaining. But somebody who really deserves a mention in this is John Williams, and that's not the genius composer John Williams, who I love, but it's actually an actor that was in this film who plays Hubbard, who is the police investigator behind the shenanigans that go on with this murder. You know, apparently he actually worked with Hitchcock more than you know, Cary Grant or Jimmy Stewart or any of those guys. Apparently he was in more Hitchcock films than anyone, you know, in terms of males. But you know, he was very entertaining. He was very upper class, very British, very pompous. And, you know, apart from the kind of the closing shot at the end where he decides to pull a comb out of his jacket and comb his mustache.
Oh yeah.
which is awfully cringeworthy. But other than that, I thought he was very, very entertaining in this film.
He was. I mean, his character was the one who he felt that something was rather fishy with the you know, the alibi.
Well, the thing is, it's alibi after alibi, because basically the original plan goes wrong, and then of course, you know, there's another story created to cover that one, and then another story created to try and get, you know, Grace Kelly off at the end, from because obviously this was back in the 50s when the death sentence was still you know, in play in the UK. So there was a lot riding on it, and you know, as I said, it's a very enjoyable ride, even though it is somewhat claustrophobic. It doesn't feel like that or feel boring in any way.
No, it didn't at all.
It serves the you know, the overall story really well.
And also, I like the fact that it's mostly told from the point of view of the husband who sets all this up. Because at the end of the day, you do kind of feel on his side, because she is cheating on him.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, we wouldn't. Nobody would go out there and try and murder their wife or get somebody to murder their wife. But you know, you can still understand it from a human point of view that, you know, he's the wrong party in this.
Oh, definitely. I mean, she's actually quite cruel with it, because not only is she cheating with him, but, you know, the person she's cheating with is invited into the home and you know, entertained and given drinks and you know, all of this sort of stuff. So in some respects, although obviously what Ray Milland is character's trying to do, and obviously he's trying to get an inheritance and all this, of course it's very wrong. But at the same time, yes, you can kind of, this is what Hitchcock's so good at, you know, you can kind of you know, see it from his point of view as well.
Yeah,
definitely.
You can sympathize with him. So you know, when he is finally caught out at the end, you do feel a bit of sadness, because you're like, oh, it might be interesting if he got away with it.
What makes me laugh though is that, you know, they all decide to have a good old drink, and then it's the end, which did sort of crack me up. But it's a very interesting journey, you know, getting to this point. And you know, the other thing is, of course, it influenced you know, again, I mentioned in other podcasts, you know, my sort of fascination throughout the 90s with thrillers that starred Michael Douglas. And and by the way, you said about Verhoeven and you know, not putting Jimmy Stewart in one of his films. To be fair though, he did model Sharon Stone on Kim Novak in that film completely from Vertigo. Right. You know, But no, I mean,
yeah. Well, he's always sort of been very influenced by Hitchcock.
Oh, definitely,
so, yeah, especially if you watch his Dutch films.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But they did do a remake of sorts called A Perfect Murder.
Oh, okay. I remember this though. Didn't they change it from he doesn't blackmail his friend, he actually blackmails the lover into killing her?
That's right. Yeah, it was directed by Andrew Davis. It also starred Gwyneth Paltrow and Viggo Mortensen and David Suchet. But basically,
what part did David Suchet play?
He played the investigator, like the Hubbard character.
Isn't that surprising? Did he have like a little twirly moustache and stuff and go?
Actually, I don't think he did. I can't remember, but yeah, there are differences. I mean, they open it out in a big way for a start. It's not as contained. So it is different, and they changed the character name and they changed some of the circumstance. So it's very loosely based on that material. But again, I found it at the time, and you know, when I've watched it more recently, another very entertaining thriller. So you know, I like those kind of things. So yeah, that's kind of why I chose it as my movie heaven. Even though there are many, and of course we have to announce as well. AFI's #1 film of all time now is Vertigo. It's actually knocked Citizen Kane off the top like 2 years ago or whatever. So I think it's AFI's and Sight and Sound's #1 movie of all time now. So you know, wow.
Yeah, well, as you say, the what we could have picked for movie heaven, there were so many choices.
So many, absolutely.
So many choices. So when it came to my choice, I decided on something that kind of, you know, I felt, you know, affected me, or, you know, I sort of discovered without having to be told about it. because, you know, with all the Hitchcock films, especially the ones that are considered his classics, you know, there's so many programs, documentaries, literature, and they all sort of talk about these great films, but they never leave much room for you to discover them. And this one I discovered by myself. I was watching Channel 4 one afternoon, and the film came on, and I was hooked from the very first frame to the end. And my pick for movie heaven is Strangers on a Train.
Yeah, fabulous film. Love it also. So yes.
um and the thing that really got me was outside of the premise was the how to make a tennis match so tense. I mean, you know, I'm not a big tennis fan. I mean, as we're recording this, Wimbledon's on.
Ah, yes, it is. Yeah, that's right.
And when I was a kid, absolutely hated Wimbledon because it would just take over the TV listings. So, you know, you could kiss Star Trek goodbye if you were in the middle of the season. You had to wait till September because here comes all the sports, and the first one always to kick it off was Wimbledon.
It sounds like me growing up. Yeah, I was always moaning about the same thing.
So it was actually for me, it was great how he was able to use this tennis match to such great effect.
Well, interestingly enough, in Dial M for Murder, there is a tennis connection in that as well, because the character that Ray Milland plays is an ex-tennis pro, you know, that sort of gave up the sport to keep his wife happy. So interesting that there's a tennis theme.
I remember when I was watching Dial M, I thought, there's a little nod to his previous film, you know.
Yeah.
To Strangers on the Train. That was a nice little touch. It's not sort of in your face, but if you knew his work, you kind of go, oh yeah.
Yeah, because Strangers on a Train was it 51? I think it was 51.
It's 50. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
Yes, 1951. So it was 3 years before Dial M for Murder.
Right, and that was also based on a novel, which was a Patricia Highsmith novel, right? Which they always say was kind of a perfect marriage of you know, her dark material and Hitchcock's, you know, take on it was kind of the perfect blend, really.
Well, it's just, I mean, I love the concept of the story. The idea is that you're on a train and this stranger comes up to you and they know who you are and they start talking to you as if they know you. And they figured out that you have a little problem that, you know, they could deal with. If you could deal with a problem that they have, is, you know, it says in his speech, when I was young, I had this idea of, you know, what would be the perfect crime, you know, swapping murders, because there'd be no what's the word?
There'd be nothing to trace you back, would there?
No, motive.
Yeah,
because why would you want to kill this stranger? You don't know them. They've not done anything to you. And of course, he uses this phrase, crisscross, which, you know, is very, in one word, sort of really just describes the whole idea of swapping murders. Now, of course, the character of Guy Haynes, the tennis player, he doesn't want anything to do with it. Yet Bruno Anthony, the stranger on the train, he goes ahead with the crime anyway. And it's just that whole sequence where he's following the ex-wife through the fun fair.
It's amazing.
It is amazing. Because it's really well done.
Because it's a flirtation, isn't it? I mean, it totally is a flirtation.
And of course, he has a thing about his hands as well. He's always sort of blowing into his hands and rubbing them before he does something. So when he does the test your strength, you know, with the hammer and the bell, and you see him do the whole thing with his hands before he does it. And of course, he's the only one who's able to strike the bell, showing how that he's actually got quite a bit of strength.
Well, it's like everything with Hitchcock. You know, he's really good at serving both plot and character at the same time, isn't he? So, you know, that's a perfect example there. He's driving the story along, but telling us something about that character that's going to be relevant as well. And
because he uses those hands later, and such a great shot. You know the one I'm talking about, where he's reflected in her glasses.
Absolutely.
Which again is another piece of the puzzle that comes into play later, because Bruno Anthony's character has a reaction when he sees the Patricia Hitchcock character.
That's right.
In it, wearing glasses, looking like the ex-wife.
No, that's right. I mean, again, one of the things he does very well in all of his films is, the use of props. Props being relevant to a story, even if they're a MacGuffin. There's always a great detail to that. So in this, of course, you've got the cigarette lighter, you've got the thick rimmed glasses.
Yes.
And just some wonderful imagery, along the way that I mean, that you mentioned, and I absolutely agree with you. I mean, the tennis match thing, that whole idea of the heads going backwards and forwards while he is just staring straight out is
well,
amazing.
I meant the second tennis match. That was the bit where he's following him, because the police have got a minder, don't they, with Guy Haynes, and so he follows him everywhere. So the Bruno Anthony character, he's sort of stalking him without bringing much notice to himself. So you see him like off in the distance in Washington, don't you?
That's
standing
right.
By that,
standing by the
and then you see him in the tennis match as well, and he's the only one who's watching the Guy Haynes character and not watching the match, because everybody else's heads are going back and forth like they do in tennis matches, and he's the only one who's static, who's just looking at him. And it's just really well done. And Robert Walker, who plays Bruno Anthony, he just has that sort of mixture of creep and suave, that you can, he's very watchable.
I agree. Definitely sort of toes that line between leading man and anti-hero, and kind of and again, he's slightly off, isn't he, with he's got the tie pin, and
that's right.
All of these details which is so relevant to the story as well as the character.
Well, that's right, because Guy Haynes's girlfriend notices that he has the Bruno tie pin on, even though he's pretending to be somebody else. And sort of just, I don't know if it was like he forgot to take it off, or he just didn't care. It's like, just to let you know that I'm not really this person.
Yeah.
But no, it's really well done. I think all the actors in it are really good. It just goes at quite a pace, and it starts straight away, them meeting on the train, and then leading off into the meeting with Guy Haynes and his wife.
Yeah.
Who blackmails her.
Well, I like the way he sets up the beginning with the just stop focusing on the feet, and focusing on them getting out of their respective cabs, and getting onto the train, and using that brush of the foot to start the conversation. And again, it's all done so effectively, and so like you were saying about the not wasting any time with the beginning of Dial M for Murder. We know what's going on with the characters and what the relationships are, and very similar in this. I mean, it gets us, we know the environment, and it just, even the shoes speak something about the characters, which is quite interesting. So absolutely agree with you 100% on this.
Though the bit at the end when the priest is Guy Haynes and his girlfriend, who are probably now married, because he still benefited from this murder. He was still got out of not being blackmailed and able to marry his sweetheart and probably become a politician as well. And so they're sitting there on the train, and this priest on the other side goes, "Oh, you Guy Haynes," and they look at each other and get up and walk away. And the priest's like, well, okay. I don't know if that's his comment on, I don't know, on faith or whatever religion.
Yeah, he always likes to end on a bit of a joke, doesn't he? A bit of dark humour at the end of what's always quite a nasty, story in many respects. But yeah, he always kind of ends it on a chuckle.
I'm just going to say, while I went back and I watched this film again, and while I was watching it, I remembered that Throw Mama from the Train was kind of based on this film.
Oh, right.
And I went back and watched it, and I don't know if you've seen it or not.
It's, you know what, it's one of those films that I think back in the day I probably did see, but is this with Danny DeVito?
Yes, and Billy Crystal.
Yeah, it's a long time ago.
Well, there is a good reason why you didn't go back to watch it. It's not a very good film.
Oh, okay.
It is kind of a remake. There is also a bit of a homage to Hitchcock as well.
Right.
Because they use some of the locations well known from his films in it. But it's just... And also, Danny DeVito's character is influenced by the film. He actually goes to watch it because Billy Crystal recommends that he should go and watch Hitchcock, because he writes DeVito writes a thriller, whodunit, where there's only 2 characters in it. But yeah, it's a very annoying film as well. Danny DeVito throughout most of the film keeps saying crisscross as it's like his mantra, and it was hard going.
It's too on the nose, is it? A little bit too on the nose.
Yeah, it wasn't very funny. And the actress who played his mum was a really horrible character. I mean, even worse than she was in The Goonies. But it's just a terrible film. So I you know, as I say, I went back and watched that because I was curious to see how it was related to Strangers on the Train. But
pretty loose, though.
Very loose and not worth rewatching, in my opinion.
Okay. I mean, one of the standout things about this film, which again, I obviously, in fact, it was part of the box set that Dial M for Murder was in. So
because it's a Warner Brothers
I had
film.
easy access to watch it again, and I did, obviously in preparation for this. And one of the things that there's such a striking scene, even if it moves slightly into ridiculous, but it's very good, is of course the climax on the merry-go-round.
Oh yeah, because one of the police officers takes a shot at Guy Haines and misses him and hits the guy running the merry-go-round, doesn't they?
Yeah, well,
the carousel.
Absolutely.
And of course then the carousel starts speeding up, and I was watching this and thinking, oh man, this reminds me of you ever see a film called Problem Child 2?
Oh, I don't think I saw the second one. I remember the
first
one.
Well, there's the idea of the second one is that there's a little girl who's as bad as the kid in it, and there's a bit when they're all on the like a merry-go-round or something like that. It's some sort of ride which the little kid can't get onto, so he sneaks in and pours the power on, and of course everybody's now getting really unwell and throwing up, and that just reminded me of that finale. There was no throwing up in this film. I felt there should have been. I mean, it was like a kid being clutched by onto her horse and stuff and crying, but nobody throwing up. It was going around pretty fast.
Yeah, there's the kid not liking it, and then there's the kid loving it, which I thought was very clever. Yeah. And then of course what he does, which I loved, I mean, again, Alfred Hitchcock likes to put his little bit of sort of dark humor in places, is the guy crawling underneath to...
Oh, God, yeah.
He kind of stops and looks at his watch for a second and then carries on. And it's like, he's brilliant at building that.
But the thing was, I saw him do that, and I think, Jesus, he's going to get clipped by something underneath there. So he's going to knock him. But he just crawls really slowly, doesn't he?
Yeah. That's great.
But yeah, when he stops it, it just gets demolished, doesn't it?
Yeah. He knows how to build. He is the master of suspense. And he knows how to build that up well. And I mean, again, like we always say, anybody out there listening, our one listener up in Leeds or whatever, anyone that wants to, get into filmmaking, absolutely. I mean, it's like, it's probably a no-brainer, but you need to go in.
You have at least watch, at least one Hitchcock film. I have to say that another thing I'm just remembering now that made me really chuckle was when Bruno Anthony pops the kid's balloon with his cigarette.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, that's a
Yeah,
classic
it's just,
moment. Yeah.
you know, the kid's like,
No, it's
but
great.
yeah,
I mean, there's many classic moments in that, and I think you're absolutely right with what you've said. It is probably, in some respects, maybe one of the lesser known of the great films of his. Obviously, which there's so many, but it's not one that instantly springs to mind. If you sort of say, "Oh, name,
yes,
5 Hitchcock films," it's always the same ones.
it's
Yeah.
always Vertigo, Rear Window, Psycho, North by Northwest. Is that 5?
Yeah,
Oh,
the
that's 4. Yeah,
birds.
the birds. Yeah,
Yeah. It's kind of, yeah, and there are plenty of others.
something quite very interesting as well. Not only was it from a novel by Patricia Highsmith, but one of the scriptwriters was Raymond Chandler.
Right.
So there you go. Even more pedigree to the film.
No, I mean, well, again, he worked both in front of and behind the camera with people who were really at the top of their game.
Yes.
Whether it be in the writing process, which it's fair to say that even though he often used novels and plays as source material, he
Yeah.
did always get very heavily involved in the writing process of everything that he did as a director.
Yes.
And again, like other collaborators, like his photographers or his composers, etc., etc. They were always people who were hugely at the top of their game. So even though many feel he's got the sort of auteur control down to an absolute T. At the same time, he was always surrounded by lots of talent as well.
Well, I think this is a good place to lead on to your pick from movie Hell, because this is a good example of him working with a film star.
Absolutely. I mean, I struggled for movie Hell because I like so many of Hitchcock's films. Obviously all the obvious ones, but I didn't really know where to go with this. So what I actually did was I sought some advice from a teacher that I know. I'll give a shout out now as a guy called John Wishmeyer.
Okay.
He is a film historian and teacher of film studies and courses. I did a Alfred Hitchcock course with him about 3 years ago, again, in order to really broaden my horizons with Hitchcock's canon of work, which, as he said, is vast.
What do they teach in a Hitchcock class?
Well, I mean, a lot of it's for people of all levels, but it's for fans. But I mean, we studied. We studied all of his different. We talked a lot about him and his past and his childhood and his influences, and we looked at obviously a lot of European films that he borrowed from or was influenced by. But then we went through all the stages of his career. So we went from the silent into the talkies, and then into the black and then of course into the moving over to the US and etc. etc. So we sort of studied that, but we watched a lot of the older films as well. So that's where I got to see quite a few things that I hadn't watched previously.
Yes.
So and John Wishmeyer, this year I did a Scorsese course with him, similar sort of format, and I'd also previously done a Nordic noir course with him where we looked at that sort of subgenre, which I found quite interesting. But anyway, so I reached out to him and I sort of said, look, if I had to talk about a Hitchcock film that doesn't really work, where would I start? Because that whether you like them or not, they've all got something, So he recommended a film to me that I hadn't seen, and I thought, well, this is good because I can not only I can use this to again watch something I hadn't seen before, and obviously do a bit of research on it as well. So I dug back to 1947 with a film called The PARADINE Case. It's essentially a courtroom drama.
It's essentially not courtroom drama. Oh God, this is such a. I sorry to interrupt you, but this is such a melodrama.
Well,
it just
is,
happened to have a court case in it.
Yeah, I mean, it is full of a lot of melodrama, and it's also what's the word I was looking for? It's gone out of my head, but it's essentially
boring.
Essentially, it's not particularly Hitchcockian, although I watched it and I did sort of pull out things that are definitely Hitchcock within it. But it's all a bit sort of schmaltzy and over the top happy and things of that nature. But what it was, this was the final film that he did with David O. Selznick. Okay.
Yes.
He had previously, in the 40s, they'd started with Rebecca and Spellbound and Notorious, and this was the last one he had to do essentially to get out of his contract with David O. Selznick, because David O. Selznick was one of those producers that almost like a sort of TV model that we'd have nowadays, or Bruckheimer or the Broccolis or whatever, where for him it was almost like the films were the producer's medium. The producer was the one that would have final say. Obviously Selznick was massively famous for the success with Gone with the Wind, and people would know things where I said sort of Hitchcock was like a star director, then Selznick was one of the star producers of the time. So it would be a David O. Selznick picture. He carried a lot of power. As I said, I would sort of equate it today to maybe a Jerry Bruckheimer or what the Broccolis do with the Bond series or whatever.
Well, I figured when watching it, it felt very much like Hitchcock was just doing this one to get it done and get it out of the way, because it just it just didn't have any heart to it. It just felt like somebody just doing it by the numbers. It's like when they say, oh, they do one for the studio and then they do one for themselves. But this one was very much doing one for the studio.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I agree. I mean, apparently throughout their collaborations, Hitchcock and Selznick clashed quite a bit, because obviously Hitchcock was quite a control freak and would want final cut and all of this sort of thing. Selznick, very much had his influence through the entire process, right from these, creatively, right from the script writing down to the final cut of the film, and even got involved sometimes during production. So I think from the limited material there is out there about the making of this film, what I managed to gather was, that there were high tensions on this. Also, it's not massively adapted from the story upon which it was based. Again, I think it was a novel by Robert Smythe Hitchens, and Hitchcock wanted to do his usual extensive rewrite, and he wanted to have Alma, his wife, who was always present and available in doing that. But a lot of their notes and their changes were actually thrown out to keep it to the original story. The story essentially, it was also originally, it was supposed to have Greta Garbo attached to it, but she didn't. Quite late on, she decided she wasn't going to do it. And at one point, Laurence Olivier was also attached, but he got an opportunity to do Hamlet, so he dropped out. So in terms of the film star, they did have a massive star. They had Gregory Peck as the leading man in this, and he plays essentially a lawyer in this, who is hired to protect the title characters.
Let's call her Mrs.
Paradine, yes. Who is kind of your classic femme fatale, very beautiful, very elegant. She was
very cold.
Yeah, very cold, dark-haired, interestingly enough, whereas Gregory Peck's wife in it was played by Anne Todd, who was a Hitchcock blonde. And it's very much he defends this woman, and falls in love with her through defending her, and it shows how this then affects outside of that his marriage, essentially.
Well, this is the thing that I thought I was one of the things I didn't like about this film was the fact that it didn't really affect the marriage, because his wife sort of cottoned on very quickly, yet instead of telling him to drop the case or she was going to leave him or having kind of some sort of natural reaction to it, she tells him to continue on to do it because, you know, to save this woman, to do it for her, because then this won't be hanging over him. And, you know, that this would be like the great love that he had lost. And it didn't ring true.
It felt forced.
Very forced.
It felt. You know, I'm so annoyed. When I was thinking about this earlier, I had the perfect word for it, and I've completely lost my vocabulary. It's gone out. This is why I should make notes, because whereas years ago I could remember everything, I'm bloody rubbish nowadays. So I can't think what the word I'm looking for is. But I mean, melodrama does sum it up to a degree, yes. But there was something else that I can't quite find at the moment. Hopefully it'll come to me. But you know, where, I mean, this at the time was a contemporary story. I mean, it was set in 1946. They mentioned that in it. So yeah, one of the little Hitchcock touches that I like is the opening shot. It says London, the near past, which I thought I quite liked that as a credit. In fact, I kind of want to use that on one of my films. I like that.
Also, the when the credits are coming on screen, there's a shot of, I'm not quite sure if it's a sword or something. Or it's supposed to be at the courthouse, and then at the end credits you see it being removed.
That's right. Yes, you do. Yeah.
What was it?
I think it's something to do with showing court was in session or something. Because again, we were talking about the time where if found guilty. Sorry, I haven't even explained to the listeners what the basic plot is. Essentially, Mrs. Paradine is accused of poisoning and killing her older wealthy husband. Yes. Okay, and that's what he's brought in to defend her for. It is also actually a very, I think it may have been the first film, in fact, a very young Louis Jourdan is in it. Future Dracula and future Bond villain.
That's Louis it, because as soon as he came on screen, because it took a while for him to see him, because his first appearance, there's a shadow covering his face, so you can't actually see who he is. But once I saw him, I heard that voice, I went, it's him from Octopussy.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I think in terms of Hitchcockian signatures in this, it definitely, there's some very good use of camera angles, close-ups, movement, you know, but things of that nature, which weren't common of cinema around that time. You know, often things were kind of in the realm of master coverage, or, you know, quite wide, letting the action play out like a sort of theatre almost. Whereas in this, the camera is definitely used to move emotion and move the story along and things of that nature. So it had some Hitchcocky things in there, which reminds me, something I wanted to really quickly mention about Dial M for Murder, which I love.
Let's go back to talking Dial M for Murder. It's much more interesting.
With photography, Hitchcock obviously always tries to get round problems. He likes to use close-ups and whatever. So they did have a problem in that, where he wanted a really close shot of a key and a really close shot of the finger dialing the telephone number, essentially dialing the M. And obviously filming this in 3D and whatever, they couldn't, you know, get the camera that close for this. So what he actually created was a massive model finger and telephone dial and a massive key. So I mean, again, he was using innovation to solve problems and using his imagination to make his story work. And, you know, you don't notice this on screen, which you shouldn't with effects, you know, essentially. But, you know, he did that. But anyway, I'm off topic. So yeah, back on Paradine Case.
Well, I just want to say, the one of the crimes this film commits is such a lazy performance from Charles Laughton. Does he not? He in every frame he looks bored.
Well, he's also incredibly, ridiculously unlikable in this. I mean,
Yes.
the first time we see it, he's essentially playing the judge in this, and the first time we see him, he's kind of literally leching at Gregory Peck's wife in it, played by Anne Todd, and he is argumentative. I mean, he's horrible to his wife in it. He treats them really badly. And again, I don't know whether this is Hitchcock's poke at the upper classes, but everybody in this is incredibly well-to-do.
Yes.
It really is Mayfair London, of the era. And but the thing here's the thing, and this is why I thought it worked. When I checked it out, I thought, yeah, I am going to go with this as movie hell. Is because yes, there's some Alfred Hitchcock, photography in it, and there's some bits and pieces. Gregory Peck, although it's very melodramatic and whatever, there's nothing actually wrong with his performance. It's just it's just a bit over the top. But here's the thing. We don't have the ticking bomb that Hitchcock's famous for in this. There's no tension. There's no thriller aspect.
No.
It's pure drama, and it's schmaltzy drama at that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
and it's just so dull. It was so boring. It dragged forever. I mean, it was what?
It's 2 hours.
Minutes?
Yeah. I mean, it's nearly 2 hours long,
and it felt like 2 days.
Yeah. But here's the other thing of interest, and I don't know whether this is why the film, because apparently, this film didn't do well at all with the critics. It was a real flop, critically.
Yeah.
And I think it is because it was quite boring. But apparently, Hitchcock, because this cost as much to make has gone with the wind, apparently, which is quite scary.
Wow.
But because Hitchcock had gone over on this, because he filmed multi-camera for the first time for the courtroom scenes, and we're talking, because this was set in England, we're talking wigs and gowns and all of that good stuff. And apparently it was all they recreated the Old Bailey, and it was all very accurate and all this sort of thing. But it went over schedule, and when it came to, and again, Selznick changed certain things that they had to reshoot, and when it came to the reshoots and the post-production work, obviously Hitchcock wanted his usual rate that was in his contract and all this. So apparently some of the pickup shots and the final editing of this was actually done by David Selznick and not Alfred Hitchcock. So again, I don't know whether that is any reason why it doesn't have the usual magic. Not to say that Selznick was a bad producer by any stretch of the imagination. It's just that I think that the combination, the marriage, if you like, didn't particularly work with this film. They'd had the success with the previous 3, which were very good.
But I think it's just at this point that Hitchcock just wanted out of his contract.
It certainly felt like it. Yes, it certainly felt like it. And this is the trouble. It's just an unremarkable drama, which is a bit over the top and doesn't really. There's definitely no thriller aspect to it.
No.
And so that's kind of why I've selected that as the. Well, as I said, it got recommended to me, and as not a good one of Hitchcock's.
Yes.
And having watched it and done a little bit of research on it, I think that it wouldn't be my top pick of his at all. So yes.
No, it's definitely sort of one to avoid. I think it's just it's not a very good film. It's very dull, and it just goes on for quite a bit.
Yeah, I think it was nominated for a few things, though.
I'm sure it was.
Based around acting more than anything. It was nominated on some of its performances. Not Charles Laughton, I guess. But, and I don't know whether it was Gregory Peck for this. I'm not sure. But, it's not one of the memorable Hitchcock movies out there. And it's because it doesn't follow his normal... I don't want to use the term formula, because that would be doing Hitchcock an injustice, but it doesn't follow Hitchcock's normal, I guess, genre, or is the term. It's not what he does best. And what he was famous for.
No. So this leads on to my pick for movie hell, and I'm going to do a bit of a preamble before I tell you what it is. Everybody has a film that they don't like, but to everybody else it's a classic. And when you say you don't like that film, you don't get it, people look at you as if you're brain dead or an idiot. How can you not like this film? It's the best film ever made. And we all have that one film that everybody holds up in high regard, and you watch it and you go, I just don't get what they're going on about. And hence, this is my pick for movie hell. And my pick for movie hell is Psycho. And I can hear everybody out there going, what the fuck?
Well, actually,
you cannot put Psycho in movie hell.
Well,
and I'm going to say to you tonight, yes, I can.
Fair enough. I mean, here's the thing. When obviously, you know, I always know this before the podcast, hence so we can, you know, prep on it, so we know what each other's doing, so that we don't pick the same films, and
that we can go and watch them as well. Because we found out at the first podcast that if you don't watch the films, it's not easy to talk about.
No, exactly. We have kind of evolved, haven't we, since that first episode? But
yes.
But what my reaction obviously was twofold. It was of absolute horror when you said this, like the reaction that you said you get from most people. But also I was kind of pleased, because I thought, good. This means that I can talk about Psycho without having to pick it as movie heaven, because, you know, for me, it's definitely in my sort of, well, definitely in the list of top 10 Hitchcock films. And if I was to choose, which I hate because it's so hard, but if I had to name a top 10 films for myself, I'm sure it would be in there, or very high in there. So you know, I obviously love it, so I'm really intrigued by this to sort of hear your side of the story. And I absolutely, before that, you know, will say that, you know, everybody's entitled to their opinion. And I used to say to students, again, when I talk to them, I said, you know, there are some things that are regarded classics that you might think is absolutely shit, and there's other things that may be considered toilet cinema that you love. And you know what? That's okay. I've told people, you know, it's your individual opinion at the end of the day, and you don't have to agree with everything that I recommend. And let me get into it. Bloody hell. So, you know, no, it's good. It's good. So I want to hear this. I want to hear this.
Okay. I think what it is it's a film where if you go into it not knowing anything about it, I imagine the experience of it must have been great. Must have been really powerful. You must have been really on the edge of your seat, because you just did not know what was going to happen. The problem is, if you go into that film knowing exactly everything that happens, including the twist, it becomes a very boring film. Yes, it is a boring film. I sat through 1 hour and 50 minutes of it today, and I was bored to tears.
Oh my God. Really? Okay.
Yes. And I'll tell you why. Because it's a lot of people. There's a lot of talk, but it's kind of talk trying to sort of bamboozle you. So, you know, Anthony Hopkins' character, Norman Bates, talks about his mother. If you know the twist, you know he's talking out of his arse. That he's talking about, you know, okay, I'm going to ruin it. Sorry. If you've not seen Psycho, it's too late. His mother's dead. She's a corpse. It's in his head. The thing is, and for me, that doesn't work either, because you hear like them arguing, you know, the other people hear them arguing. Now, but you hear a woman's voice. You don't hear him pretending to be a woman. And of course, at the end, when after the psychiatrist has explained everything to you because, you know, you're too stupid to figure this all out. I mean, that ending is just so terrible. You've been spoken to as if you're stupid. Oh, well, he's mad, you know. He's, you know, it's mother. His mother's taken over completely. Oh, no, it wasn't about the money. You'll find that's in the swamp. It's just like, I watched the fucking film. I don't need it to be explained to me. I know. What the fuck? I know, but my point being is that you hear the mother's voiceover is forced, but you've heard that voice before. To me, it just doesn't work because you never once hear him do like a mother's voice. You know, it's clearly a woman's voice when it's supposed to be him talking to himself. You know, I mean, also the fact this is the film that's given birth to the idea of killing your main character halfway through the film. Another spoiler. You know, and also the fact that Janet Leigh's character, Marion Crane, I don't feel any pity for her. She's she's in a situation where she's dating this guy, this Sam Loomis, and he's, you know, they make it look like they're having an affair or something, but it's just that he's from, was it a poor background or something, or he's got debts and she's stuck in this really, you know, bad job, and this opportunity comes along, this 40 grand in cash, by a very exposition depositing Texan in a white hat, you know. And she takes a runner with it, and of course, so you know, she's been. I mean, I think that you know, once she's on the road, and there's a whole bit when the police is following, and she's trying to sell the car and everything. She drives off without her luggage and stuff. I thought that was kind of interesting, but then you get to the hotel, and I'm just waiting for the shower scene. Now, I'm not going to say it's not a badly made film. This is technically technically it's a great film. The editing in it is perfect. The music is great. It's just the story. If you know what's happening, it's like, I guess it was like how horror films play out. So if you go into a horror film and you don't know what to expect, those moments when nothing happens, it's just all build up and the tension. And then once something happens, it's a relief, you know, because then you get the shock. So if you know what's happening and you're waiting for the shower scene, the rest, the build up is just, it's just boring because you're just waiting for it. And the thing is that Hitchcock has done, I know he didn't have much money and he used his TV crew from Hitchcock Presents. So the shot-wise, they're very sparse. They're very long takes. They're always like kind of like 2 shots, or, you know, there's a lot more space in them. And they're all really well done, but there's a slower pace until you get to the shower scene where it's really fast cutting. And that is just like a masterclass in editing. But then you're following Norman Bates. Now, as an audience member watching it for the first time, I imagine you'd be on his side. I think that's what they're trying to do. It's like, oh shit, his mother's killed this woman and now he's got to cover it up and he might get caught. But it doesn't work for me because I know who he is, that he is the killer. So why should I feel sympathy for him? And so you're just kind of watching it go through its paces. And, you know, and as I said, this has given birth to other kinds of films where they kill off their main character. And the example that I can think off the top of my head was Death Proof.
Mm-hmm.
You remember? So you had one bunch of annoying girls that get replaced by another bunch of annoying girls that you have to get to know over again. And the only saving grace of that film was Kurt Russell.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, yes. One of the big coups of it at the time was it broke the narrative convention. You know, again, Hitchcock always sort of trying different things. It was also, of course, the birth of the slasher film to follow as well, kind of with this. I mean, I guess I don't know. Maybe it's nostalgia that works as well, because I've got to say, from from my perspective, and I mean, it is one of my favorite films. I do think it's a masterpiece. And in fact, when, back when I taught, I did actually do a whole term just on Psycho, right, for the students. So I put them all, or some who didn't know what it was about, through all of this. I suppose I need to, in some respects, thank my parents, because how my exposure to Psycho was probably in the sort of early to mid 80s. And what happened, it was back to this whole VHS home video generation again. My dad had hired two of the sequels. They're actually, it spawned three sequels, a remake, and now a prequel TV series, which I'm really enjoying. But he got, I think, the second two sequels on VHS, one of which was actually directed by Anthony Perkins. And what happened was, bless him, in order for me to know what was going on, I think this sort of coincided with Psycho being on television one evening in one of these sort of murder mystery suspense seasons that they used to do on ITV or whatever. And again, he let me, even though I was fairly young, but he let me stay up and watch that. And of course, my instant thing, like a lot of people make the mistake, I thought the film was a lot older than it was because it was in black and white. I didn't realize that was kind of the point, and that was one of the things he was doing. But before I really knew anything about actual filmmaking, itself, and the techniques and all this sort of thing, obviously the Bernard Herrmann's amazing score, captured me definitely with this. Let's be honest, Janet Leigh is not difficult on the eye at all, is she? And I know,
but
I was kind of,
you're not convincing me here.
But I
Keith, come on, convince me. Why should I not put this in movie hell?
I mean, you've got your reasons and you're entitled to them, but I mean, I think it works on every level. Meaning, the performances, I think, throughout it are solid for what they. Well, first of all, let's strip it right back. Let's go back to the script and the source material. Okay, it's based on a novel by Robert Bloch. That Hitchcock happened to read and wanted to secure the rights to. Now, he, along with Joseph Stefano, who was his script writer, they took a lot of liberties with this, and they changed this. I mean, in the, a lot of people say to me, the new TV show is what you could argue it's a prequel to the novel. And I say, well, no, if you look at the casting of Norman Bates in this, in the novel, he is a fat, middle-aged, balding man. Norman Bates. And they obviously decided to go with a young, attractive, guy in Anthony Perkins. So they took a lot of liberties with that aspect of the story. But in terms of the build-up and the tension, I mean, I every time I watch it, and I watch this film a lot, and I've watched it with various commentaries, and I had it on VHS and then on DVD and then Blu-ray and all this, and I've seen it whenever it gets released again at the cinema. I always go and see it because I don't know, I find it absolutely riveting, and I'm trying not to be pretentious about it, but I think the setup is amazing. Yes, I take your point. It takes a long time before anything actually happens, but just the thing, the use of the camera, the music, the techniques, everything, it kind of just pulls you in, I find. And I find it's one of those films, I think I've mentioned this before, you can own it on DVD or whatever, but if you happen to flick on the TV one day and it's on, you can't help but keep watching. Well, I have this with Psycho, and I'm sorry you don't, to be fair.
I know, and this is the thing. This is a film that everybody talks so passionately about, and I keep coming back to it. I keep coming back to it, and I go, I'll give it another go. I'll give it another go. I'm sure I'm wrong. I'm sure maybe it was when I watched it last. Maybe I need to be a bit older. I don't know. You know, something. Every time I watch it, I just don't like it. And I sit through the whole thing, and I just go, yeah, it's technically very good, but it's just not engaging me.
See, if you'd watched the remake and said this, I'd kind of get where you were coming from. But yeah, you know, I do find it hard with this one because, you know, I'm a fan of the whole sort of franchise of it. But, you know, this first film, this original film is God, it's one of those things that's almost hard to. I mean, again, there's endless studies on this out there, but you know, all I can talk is personally, and as I said, for me, it's one of those things that I can just always watch and enjoy, and you know, it doesn't matter that I know what's going to happen. It just kind of, you know, it pulls me in, and I love it. And you know, as I said, I could not believe it when, as I said, part of me was kind of happy because it gives me this opportunity to talk a bit about it. But yeah, you know, it's interesting. It's interesting.
As I say, I've told a few people that I was going to do this, and they all thought I was crazy. And I thought maybe I shouldn't pick this one. Maybe I should go with something else. Because people are going to go, what the fuck are you talking about? Why Psycho? It's a classic, man. It's great. But for me, it's not. And I think it's just because it's one of those films that it's such part of the zeitgeist that everybody knows it. You may not have seen it, but you know it. You know, you do the famous drink. Everybody knows it's Psycho.
Yeah.
You know? And so I was exposed to it too much growing up. So when I finally saw it, I just knew it.
Yeah.
I knew it, and there was none of that tension. It didn't capture me. And so if you don't have that, there really isn't much else in there. It is a prototypical horror film where it's all about the build up to that scare. And there's nothing else in the story that captures me. You know, it's not the dialogue, it's not the characters. Even though I think everybody is perfectly cast and they've really done a great job, I can't fault the acting in it. It just doesn't connect with me. I can't, and it's just one of those films I don't get.
Fair enough. I mean,
I would want to get it because, you know, it's Psycho.
Yeah. I mean, well, this is what these podcasts are about. I mean, we're not doing this as a history lesson in film genre or anything like that. We're doing them as a personal thing, and it is about what we personally think. And absolutely, if it's personally doesn't float your boat, then fair enough. You know, part of me thinks you were maybe robbed by hype. I don't know. Maybe you knew too much about this before you saw it, and it's a shame it like robbed you of that experience.
Exactly. I mean, the thing about films like this is, as much as we try and keep them away from kids, childhood is probably the best time to experience them.
Yeah. Because
that's when you're more open to being scared. And if I had seen this film as a kid, it probably would scare the shit out of me. You know? But as an adult, I think I was a teenager, actually, late teens when I watched it. I saw it on TV, and it just, you know, I remember there was I remember seeing a film. It was like an anthology film or something, but there was a kid who was absolutely obsessed with this film, and then he actually finds himself transported into the film, and he gets chased around by Norman Bates.
Oh wow! Okay,
I can't rely for me. I was trying to think of what it was called. I think it might be like a horror anthology film or something. But I cannot remember what it's called. Okay. I do remember that, and I remember that being the worst bit of that film as well.
Wow. Okay.
But then that's just me.
Yeah. I mean, it is. You know, it is something we could debate for fucking hours, because it really is one of those type of films. But because another thing that I find very interesting about it all, and again, I don't want to turn it into a big thing on this, is the fact that Gus Van Sant, because of the success he'd had with Good Will Hunting and whatever, was lucky enough to be able to sort of pick his favorite film of all time and remake it. Okay, and yes, okay, they contemporized it and made it in color and put different actors in, of course, but it's funny.
Boobs in it.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because even though all of the edits, the shots, the music cues, everything is kind of shot for shot exactly the same, it's so weird how it doesn't work. And even
partly partly it was the casting.
Well, the casting, definitely something.
Yeah, I had Vince Vaughn as Norman Bates.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember the one shot they always kept bringing up saying why he didn't work was there's a shot of Anthony Hopkins when he's eating an apple and you see his Adam Apple he has a little reaction when, I think it's when he's talking to the detective, and you can see his Adam Apple sort of gulp, and they do the same shot and Vince Vaughn doesn't have a pronounced Adam's apple, so you don't see anything, so it's just literally a shot of his neck.
I mean it's, and also the other thing that was kind of, I thought, felt weird and hokey about the remake was you had some of the actors like Viggo Mortensen and definitely oh god, what was it?
Anne Heche?
Not Anne Heche, but oh my god, my what is wrong with my memory today? I'm trying to.
Oh, I haven't seen it, so I don't know.
Oh god.
Well, what character was it?
The one who plays Vera Mills' character. In fact, I'm having the problem she's got in that film recently, Still Alice, where she starts losing her memory. Julianne Moore. Sorry. Yeah, so Viggo Mortensen and Julianne Moore kind of, this is where I should have notes, kind of very, very much make the characters their own. And even though they're saying the same dialogue and whatever, their choices, both, in wardrobe and how they play the characters and whatever, are very different to John Gavin and Vera Miles, who are their, counterparts.
Yeah.
Whereas, definitely William H. Macy, does pretty much copies Martin Balsam's performance to a T. The James Remar, who plays the cop for that scene, at the window when she's pulled over, again, plays exactly the same. So you've got sort of, that feels disjointed as well. You've got, some people who have kind of broken away from it and others that are trying to do it exactly the same. And yeah, I mean, it doesn't work on a lot of reasons, but I don't know how I've got onto that really, but
yeah, but I mean, yeah, I was going to bring up the remake, but I wouldn't for a second say it was better than the original.
No way. No, in
fact,
it
was one of those pointless remakes. It's like, what
it was totally pointless. In fact, it was weird. Like I said, I did with the students, the sort of 16 to 19-year-olds, we did a term on Hitchcock. And what we did is we started by watching Alfred Hitchcock's 1960 film at the beginning of the course. And then we talked a load over subsequent weeks. And I ended with playing the Gus Van Sant remake for the last class, right? And I just wanted to find out from a fresh, young audience of now that are used to 3D and color and all this sort of shit, which they thought worked better, and all of them, I'm pleased to say, I think there was maybe two exceptions in the class, which were those kind of characters that would say this just to wind me up or whatever, but most of them agreed that Hitchcock's worked better. But it was interesting, one of the reasons they couldn't deal with it, and again, I said that's more because of history, because of where his career's gone, is they associate Vince Vaughn with comedies because of his career beyond that film, which is quite interesting because now it's just started on television. We've got season 2 of True Detective, and it's interesting to see him again going back to a sort of dark, serious role when he has been so associated with this sort of Owen Wilson partnerships and comedies and things of that nature. So it's quite interesting. We'll see how that progresses and whether that works.
Yeah, but then I wouldn't say that Vince Vaughn sort of characters that he played early on were that dark. They're always sort of the loudmouth, confident one. I mean, if like in films like Swingers and Made.
Yeah. Oh, he was always associated with
he was always the loud
comic timing and all that stuff. Definitely.
Well, but I mean,
he certainly wasn't
not to a point where he's
Bates, that's for sure.
No.
And you know, I mean, I have to say, you know, the sequels, and one of them was sort of a prequel sequel, which starred well, they all had Anthony Perkins in, but one of them had Henry Thomas from E.T. playing the young Norman Bates, and you know, they were all quite entertaining films in their own right. And of course, I'm quite enjoying. We've got the TV show now, which is sort of contemporized prequel that takes place sort of 10 years, I guess, before the events of Psycho. But obviously they've sort of relocated it and whatever. But they've kept some iconography, like they've kept the house and the hotel looking pretty much the same. And obviously casting wise with Freddie Highmore, you know, they've kind of tried to sort of style him a little bit on the sort of Perkins look. So, and again, we know where this series is going to go, but I'm quite enjoying. I mean, Vera Farmiga makes it definitely, and I'm as mother, and I'm kind of interested as to how that's going to, you know, pan out and you know what direction that's going to go in. But yeah, I mean, for me, you know, Hitchcock has a load of great films, but you know, Psycho is you know, definitely in his top 5 as far as I'm concerned. And you know, as I said, I feel a bit sad that you I don't know, that you don't like it, because we often agree on so many things. So this is kind of interesting.
I know. I mean, we're not going to like everything.
No, we're not. Absolutely. No. And it's okay not to like stuff that's classic. Like I've got another good mate. I won't name him on this podcast, but he hates Citizen Kane with a passion. Yeah, and again,
oh man, how can you not like Citizen Kane?
Take a breath. But I mean, you know, hey, you know, it's not for everyone. You know, I get it. But you also, I think, have to be mindful of its importance in the history of cinema and in the history of filmmaking.
True.
And like you rightly said, you don't think this is a badly made movie. It's just, it doesn't quite work for you. I get it. So,
it doesn't work for me.
Yeah. But interesting.
Indeed. I just want to ask this before we sort of wrap up. What is your favorite Hitchcock cameo?
Oh, cameo. Okay. Yeah, because of course we forgot to in the 2 middle films we chose, we had the sort of thing with the cello, didn't we? Him moving the cello. Yeah. So he was getting on the train. And both times the 2 cameos with Strangers on the Train, and the Paradine Case was him with a cello, either getting on or getting off a train. And of course in Dial M for Murder, it was quite clever because he was in a photograph, a reunion photograph. I think probably one of the most imaginative ones is in Rope, where they have the sort of outline of his face, you know, the famous Hitchcock logo, as a sort of neon sign outside the window. Although apparently he also appears in the opening shot that establishes the building as well. So I've read somewhere.
Yeah.
So I'm not too sure. But of course, Lifeboat is quite a clever one, because in Lifeboat you'd think, okay, how the fuck can he make a cameo in Lifeboat? But apparently they've got a newspaper, and there's an ad for a thing to try and lose weight. So he's also taking the piss out of himself. But yeah, he's in an ad for that. So you know, those are the more subtle, sort of not too in your face ones.
Yeah,
you know?
The Psycho one was not subtle. Him standing outside the office with a Stetson on, white Stetson,
which Gus Van Sant did in the remake, which I thought was a bit of a touch, but yeah.
I have to say, I am not a fan of directors' cameos,
right?
Because and I'll tell you why, because most of the directors I've worked with who wanted to do a director's cameo, it's like, well, what's the point? Nobody knows you.
Yes, yeah, unless
and
you're
it's
famous.
like, well, Hitchcock did it.
Yeah,
and it's like, yeah, well, but the thing is, Hitchcock was famous, and it was something that he did in every film.
Yeah.
So it became a running gag. You're just doing it because, because everybody else does it, and that's why I try as hard as possible never to have director cameos in my films.
I did like the Spielberg one in Gremlins, where he goes on the little buggy thing.
That's right. But I mean, there's so much stuff going on there, and also the thing with Spielberg, you find that a lot of the times he just gets dragged in for a little part, because I remember his cameo in the Blues Brothers.
That's right, absolutely.
He's the Clark at the end, isn't he?
With a line, if memory
with a line,
serves.
yes, that's right, yeah. But I'm not a big fan of it. So trying to think what my favourite Hitchcock one is. I think probably the lifeboat one is because it's a nice little gag that that is not so in your face.
No, I mean, it's not so in your face at all. You actually have to look for it. It's not even like a close up of the newspaper or anything. It's kind of just there, which is very, very clever. I thought that they did that, but I mean, I feel like we have literally just talked about the tip of the iceberg with this. It is the tip of the iceberg. If you want to know, I've read a very good book recently that went through all his filmography, and that's a book called The Art of Alfred Hitchcock. So if you can find that, get it. It's very well written, and it covers all the films in his filmography. Yeah. Well, the interviews he did with Francois Truffaut as well are very, very good, because that's where he talks about how he drew a lot of his influence from those guys, basically, and from the European cinema of the early cinema days. But yeah, I mean, there's yards of material and videos and all sorts of things out there, and
there's some very, very good documentaries as
great documentaries. And again, there are I still find that there are some films in there that I've not seen. I hadn't seen the Paradine Case until preparing for this podcast. Okay, some could argue I didn't really gain anything by seeing it, but
no, probably 2 hours you'll never get back.
Well,
that's what I felt.
It's all part of it, but there are still quite a lot of his British films and his silent films that are becoming available now. That's the good thing. Things are starting to get Blu-ray releases. Some of the more rare stuff is coming out there, and even back in those early films, you could definitely see influence and style which would serve the films that were to come. So a great influence on many of our favorite filmmakers of today and the past, and I have to say, I've always loved his work. I like his sort of macabre sense of humor, I always find something interesting in them. Definitely a visual filmmaker.
So that was our picks for Movie Heaven, Movie Hell.
The controversial episode.
Well, I don't know. We'll see. But yes, so Keith, how can people find you?
Right, if you go to YouTube and put in British Eyles, that's EYLES, you can find my films, my short films on there, and there are ways to get in touch, etc., if you so desired.
And you can find me via my website at independentrunnings.com. Also, I have a YouTube page, which is Independent Runnings. We also have a Facebook page. So please, if you do listen to this podcast, do like the Facebook page. And you can just search Movie Heaven, Movie Hell. Also, we have a Twitter page, which is at Movie Heaven Hell. And also do check us out on YouTube. You can find that Independent Runnings. So that just leaves me to say thank you for listening to this podcast. And if you do feel inclined, please do leave us a review on iTunes and a star rating. I suggest 5 stars.
That nice. Sounds good. Why not? Aim for the top.
That's it.
Bye-bye for now.